Welcome to the PGUSD special school board meeting, where we are going to be in open session for just a bit before we break to close. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Adamson to call us to order.
Absolutely. President Dr. Hazen.
I am here.
Burke McNary. Here. Trustee Ottmar. I'm here. Trustee Shamaz.
Here.
And Trustee Wax.
Here. Perfect. And we're going to start with our land acknowledgement. I really did that out of order, but that's okay. Good evening. As we begin this meeting, it's important to pay respect to and acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Ohlone, Costanoan, and Esalen people, and additionally pay respect to elders, both past and present. So following on that, we now have item D, the adoption of the agenda. So is there anyone in the public that would like to comment on our agenda for today? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I would just like to, put something out to the board. Typically, we have our school accountability report cards are on consent. And I think that was definitely an error. In looking at past practice, we've always had them on action. And so I'm going to propose to the board tonight that we consider pulling that and just making it an action item, if nothing else, to really just be able to have that opportunity for discussion specific, to those report cards. Open to comment from the board.
Any comment from the board on that? If not, I'll jump in with one. I agree with that this time. I will say I am a fan if there aren't surprises, like if we're maintaining trends, if it's similar, I am a fan of that sort of, the SARCs going on at consent in the future, but just want to mention that. But this time I think it is a good idea since that's been the past practice to have it as action. I'm good.
Agreed.
I am good with it changing today. I do have to say that I think I would actually prefer it as action, just so that we can go over it thoroughly, and if there's comments to be made and all that we're not just sort of one fell swooping it. Because there were some things that I wanted to discuss. And if that comes up, then each time we're going to have to move it off of consent. So I think I'd prefer it if moving forward we would have it on action. That would be my preference.
I appreciate it. I'll just be honest. Part of I'm trying to put as much on consent as possible because of our late meetings. So that's why, but I agree. And maybe I could introduce a compromise where if we have trustee questions, we could make sure it's on action. And if we don't, we could consider on consent. Does that sound good? Okay.
That sounds great.
And I think I'll just comment too. I brought this to Dr. Adamson's attention because in reading previous year's agendas, we have had it on action. So I didn't want there to be any appearance of us just shoving something on consent that we haven't discussed, because in past practice, we have had them in action and discussed them substantively. So for transparency purposes for this year, and then we can talk about what works moving forward. Yeah.
Sounds great. Okay. I will start us off with a motion to approve the agenda with the addition or the modification of the SARC to action from consent, leaving only the contract with Eide Bailey on consent. Got a second, or is there anyone who wants to? Second. Okay, so moved by myself, seconded by Trustee Wax. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. None opposed, passes 5-0. So with that, we are now going to clock out at 5:33 and go into. Thank you. I will identify the closed session item topics before we clock out at 5:30 something and mention that we have 5 today, which are negotiations, collective bargaining session, planning and prep with PGTA for 24-25, negotiations, collective bargaining with the CSEA also for 24-25. Public employee discipline, dismissal, release, leave complaint, conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation. And then we also have superintendent goals review, last but definitely not least, our mid-year check-in. So I think we will take some public comments on closed session topics before we adjourn. Okay, with that, we'll adjourn at 5:34, 1 minute later. Thanks. And apologies for the delay, but lots of important discussions were had. And so just to report on that, negotiations, item 1 with PGTA, information was received. Item two, collective bargaining for the CSEA. I think information was also received. Item three, public employee discipline dismissal release leave complaint. Information was received, direction was given. Conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation. Information was received. And then for item five, the superintendent goals, no information was received yet, but we will be going back to closed session afterwards to do that. So with that, we are now on to the Pledge of Allegiance. And since Laura was so kind to volunteer, she will be leading us today. Thank you so much for voluntolding. And then we move on now to the consent agenda, which is item 4 for those following along. And we did agree that we were going to pull item A to information discussion, the SARCs. So that will be coming up in a bit, but we're just dealing with one consent agenda item. The item B, the contract for services with Eide Bailly. So with that, we have a time for public comment on item B on consent. Okay, none online. Board, any comments on item B or questions? Okay. With that, we can take a motion to approve consent as presented.
I'll move that we approve the contract for services with Eide Bailly LLP.
Right. Just a note, I think we approve the consent as a whole, right? So it's
Oh, we're
technically,
doing, but that isn't.
even if it's the only item on consent, I think, right? Is that correct? Yeah. Yes, I got
I'll
something right
move
for once.
That we approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Thank you. So that motion was made by trustee Shamas and seconded by trustee McNary. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, that passes 5-0 for consent. And so now we have item A, the SARC school accountability report cards for information discussion. I'll call that item AAA, 3 A's just to make it safe. Good point, rather than information discussion. And then we will be moving to the budget study session after that.
All right. Good evening, trustees. Larry Hagquist, Executive Director of Educational Services, here to present the school accountability report cards for the 2023-2024 academic year. The purpose of my presentation tonight is to seek board approval to post the SARCs that you see in the board packet to the PGUSD website, as well as the California Department of Education website by the required date of February 1st. The SARCs are important documents that help the public. Anybody who wants information about our schools can access these SARCs via the CDE website and or Pacific Grove Unified website. We have SARCs on our website dating back all the way to the 2001-2002 school year. And this will be added to that before February 1st, pending board approval. How the SARCs compiled, I think it's important to note that all 103 pages of SARC documents that you see in the board packet tonight require a team effort to put together. We have the site admin, ed tech department, HR, MOT, and PE staff as well, contributing to what you see in the board packet. The site admin are responsible for writing the narrative sections, the paragraphs about the schools. Ed tech provides the CBEDS information, the California Basic Educational Data System information. HR provides staffing information. MOT provides the FITS. Also, that's just short for Facilities Inspection Tool. What you see in the SARC document is just a real abbreviated version of a much larger document that's contained in the FIT reports. And the PE staff provide information about the physical fitness test, the 5 elements of the physical fitness test they provide to me. And I help to compile the SARCs. What is included? Lots of information, everything you need to know about the schools. You've got demographic information, school achievement data, which matches the data that I presented at the November board meeting about the CASP, class size information, school safety, dashboard metrics, staffing, salaries. All of this information is housed in one place. And not only is it helpful for the public who wants to learn about the schools, for parents who want to make decisions about where they want to send their schools. Every public school in California has to provide the same information and make it public. But it's also a helpful tool internally. I know that when I was working as a TOSA and an administrator at the high school, putting together the WASC report or the accreditation report, the SARC reports were some of my most frequently visited reports. It's really nice to be able to have all that data in one place. I also know that the SIPSAs, or the school plans for student achievement, contain some of the same information here. So the information provided in the SARCs, really it's a very, very helpful planning tool. It's helpful for, like I just mentioned, the SIPSAs, the LCAP, to help build alignment throughout the district and make sure that our numbers and the data coordinate and that we have proper alignment. So that's really a little bit about the SARC reports that you see in the board packet. And once again, what I'm seeking tonight is simply board approval so that I can do what every school district needs to do by February 1st, and that is post them to the district website as well as the CDE website. Happy to answer any questions that I can about these. And thank you very much.
Okay, great. And thank you for that excellent presentation, Dr. Hegquist. Any comments from the public? Okay, not online. I think we're gonna go start at the end, come towards me if that's okay with you, Trustee Wax.
I actually don't have any questions at this time, but no, I revised it. Are there any metrics or like data points that you think, I know it's not required by the state, but that doesn't kind of capture the full picture of PGUSD or that you'd like to see?
Not that doesn't capture the full picture of PGUSD. I think that there are some metrics that we want to focus on. I know something that I've talked about in our last meeting was the chronic absenteeism metric, which is available there. And it's helpful to be able to look back at prior years and see trends and things like that.
So this came first before LCAP, correct?
So
I'm pretty
yeah,
sure,
yes.
like
I mean,
you're saying that I remember this. I remember when the state said we all had to do.
Oh, yeah,
this.
absolutely. LCAP didn't.
So
I think
LCAP did not come
2015.
in.
Yeah, these things go like all the way back to,
Right.
you know, early 2000s. LCAP didn't come until I think around 2015.
Right. So I'm just reiterating kind of what you said, just to kind of for the public to understand that this is a state requirement, longstanding, but that, like you said, it informs the LCAP and
Absolutely.
the schools, their own plans. So it is an important document, and it's foundational.
Absolutely. It's a lot like, you know, teachers use student data to
Mhm.
make decisions around instruction and to provide intervention and support in attempts to improve metrics. And so these are the baseline, these provide some baseline metrics where we can say, hey, we need to improve in this area. We need to implement a plan. So what we're trying to do in our district is make sure that all of our plans have alignment and they coordinate. And, you know, our core values are have been very, very helpful in assisting with that alignment. And I was able to speak to that a little bit at the city council meeting on Monday.
Oh, that's good. And also, the personnel that have to input all this data. It's time consuming.
Yeah, yes, there is a lot of data in here. Fortunately, we do have a system called DTS or Doc Tracking Services. They are able to extract a lot of the data that is uploaded via seabeds to help us with that process, but there is definitely some.
And when do you start on this for?
We started in December.
Thank you.
Thank you for this. My question is, I know that you had mentioned chronic absenteeism. My assumption is that we're going through this data and looking at areas that we've kind of dropped off, and that will be our focus. Some of the things I was seeing was, in the district, our percentage went down to 84.29% for fully credentialed teachers for subject and student placement. Let's see.
That is that regarding chronic absenteeism, or that's teacher?
I'm sorry, that was 2021. Maybe I misread it. Nope, I take it back. I think I just misread it. So thank you.
Yeah, we
very
do
much.
that.
But
though.
you do
know,
look through
we
and-
look for some alarming figures or things like that like jump out and use those as maybe potential growth areas for plans that we're creating.
Thank you very much.
I think your presentation answered all of my questions kind of about the purpose of the SARC and its role. And I think even more so like our role and what we're doing. We're kind of just reviewing the information, and that's about it at this point. Okay. I feel more comfortable then. And I love that we're using it as a tool to align all of our goals and our cultural values. And thank you for bringing that with everything that you do, Dr. Adamson. And thank you for presenting this evening.
Absolutely.
I'll just add one minor question too. I noticed I think it was science, the school numbers were particularly low. I don't know if that's just due to, there were dashes in 2022, 23, and then a low number 23, 24, but the district was quite
Are you
high.
talking about achievement data?
Correct, the CASP test results in science for all students.
Oh, yeah. So what there, I mean,
There's not as many tests given in 20.
so there was a switch where we went, and this is the high school, the 11th graders that they used to take in 11th and 12th grade, and we made a switch to make it just 11th grade. So that's
the 10 or fewer dashes. Okay, that's great. And the other thing I'll just say is I know we heard that other districts do not have SARCs in their action item necessarily. So just something I propose for the board that when there's updates that are outside of the norm, we'd love to have it, but we'll consider putting it on consent where there's no big surprises and there's no questions from the trustees going forward.
Can I share a little bit about my perspective on that?
I would love that actually. Yeah. Just a comment for that reason.
The action item is a little bit anxiety provoking from my end because there's just 103 pages worth of data. So I was a little bit concerned that I'm like, are they going to ask me about a data point that I don't recall after reviewing them? And I know that that's not the goal with the action item, but I do think that as an informative piece, it's a good action item because it just reminds people every year that the purpose behind the reports and its value with respect to all of the other things that we're doing.
Trustee Admar, did you have something that you wanted to add?
It was just a question. Well, now I'm going to ask you about a data point. Once you said that. It was actually just curiosity with science by student group. I just noticed that female has all dashes. Is it just that we don't report that the student groups are reported together, both male and female?
I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I just know it just stood out to me as well as like Hispanic or Latino, 2 or more races, white, English learners. So
Yeah.
they're all listed, but I'm guessing that all the information was just included under all students, but it's all students and male are the only ones that have numbers.
Yeah, the double dashes represent when there's less than 10 students per category. So if you notice that all students is 16, so I think once you start dividing 16, you get below 10, and then you have to
So there's not 10 females that took,
not in the.
it was just,
Yeah. Because it says only 15 students were tested, so out of that 15,
right,
I'm
okay.
guessing
So the remainder of that. would
12
be
were male, but
three.
that means 3 must have been female.
3 were
is
female.
is the answer
That's
there, yeah.
interesting. That doesn't seem,
Like a lot, yeah.
yeah, that does, okay.
I think
That
you're
brings
going-
another question up,
I-
but
I-
I'll let it go.
That's where I was going with it, as you were saying that, Trustee Otmar is, I think the great thing about this, it allows it, because of the way that that's disaggregated the data, it gives us a sense of, do we have enough, is there equity, and, we're looking at it by gender or student group of,
I
number
know.
of students represented, right?
It doesn't look like it. So that's something that I would like to make sure that we're paying attention to, that there's more than 3 females that are being tested
I think, yeah, for
in
AP.
science. So thank you.
I think that was specifically, was that for the AP students, right? Or was it? Or, yeah, just, yeah. I think definitely we'll take a look at that, because the numbers do seem, a little low with it, and it'll be something that we, we'll look into a little further. So thanks for bringing that to our attention.
But it looks like, there were only 16 students enrolled, of which 15 were tested. So we're not under testing. There's just not many students enrolled in the course that's being tested. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I suppose my point would be then maybe perhaps we could focus on females and
Pulling in.
Hispanics. Yeah, Hispanic or Latino students, or multiracial students that could be, we could support them a little bit more. That's a different topic, but thank you for the information.
Okay. I think with that, so as an action item now, we do have public comment, board discussion, and a motion. So any public comment on the SARCs as presented by Dr. Heckquist? We did our board discussion again. Sorry about that a little bit before, but then I would go ahead and make a motion that we approve the school accountability report cards as presented.
I'll second.
Motion made by myself and seconded by Trustee Otmar. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm not opposed, but before I say yes, I would push back a little on this being on the consent, because obviously questions do arise with this. And so, it's just a matter of how you manage that particular meeting. So it can be done in a way that doesn't have to take up too much time, but still highlights some items that board members really want to talk about, or the public, but.
Point well noted. Yeah, we had much more discussion than I was expecting, which is a good thing.
Yeah,
So yeah, I
yeah.
appreciate that.
So, yes.
Okay, so how would your vote be? That was an aye?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. Okay, so it does pass
Yes.
5-0. As well. So with that, I don't think I gavel. Do I gavel out since we're going special, or do we just migrate over with my gavel in hand?
Explain what you.
Okay. So we're going to be doing information discussion on the 25-26 budget, given many past presentations and detailed presentations by Josh, but now we're going to the administration is recommending we receive information, discuss it with opportunity for public to make comments at the end as well, right? Okay, thank you.
Louis has to get the slide deck up. Before we get started, before the slide deck is put up, I'd just like to acknowledge that we have the entire cabinet here tonight. This is a collaborative discussion with our cabinet as well as our fiscal officer, Carly Adams, is with us here this evening to support in this presentation. Very happy to have everyone here at the table, and everyone's input is certainly very important and valid. We will get that put up. All right. Next slide, Louis. All right, so tonight in preparation for our 25-26 budget development, I'm going to focus on 3 areas for our board and our community who's listening in. Number 1, we're going to review the district's budgetary constraints prior to the 25-26 budget development. We're going to discuss restricted program funding that PGUSD has been fortunate to have in prior years, and what we already and those resources that have already sunset prior to the end of 24-25. Second, we're going to review the district's historical enrollment ratios and those related to staffing. During this area of focus, we will look to strategize with the board on our state of declining enrollment and the district's desire to align staffing with projected student enrollment. And third, the final area of focus will be the district's multi-year deficit spending trends. We're going to focus on areas where PGUSD can reduce the unrestricted general fund expenditures and further impact to expiring resources on the multi-year projections. We will go ahead and get started tonight with taking a look at the district financials at first interim reporting, which is our financials through October 31st, 2024. This was recently presented at the December board meeting, but it's a snapshot of where we stand this evening. PGUSD has a combined deficit of just over 2.9 million. This is broken down by restricted and unrestricted. You can see that up there. Our restricted deficit is just over 2 million, 2,068,175. And our unrestricted deficit is currently at 868,148. PGUSD has combined revenues of just over 46.4 million. And this breaks down in the following ways. I'm going to get into much further detail tonight related to what LCFF sources are, federal sources and state sources. But you can see the breakdown there in our breakdown of revenue, predominantly associated with LCFF sources, which is where our property tax revenue lives. Just a quick highlight there, just over 85% of all revenue in this district is tied to property taxes. It's substantial. Tonight, as we progress through the presentation, I'll refer back to these revenue sources. Next slide. So just like we reviewed current revenues, we must identify the current state of our expenditures at first interim. You'll see on the slide at first interim, we had just under $49 million in expenditures projected for the 24-25 school year. One area to note, over 87% of our overall expenditures are tied to salary and health and welfare for our employee groups. This is over 7% higher than the state average with comparable LEAs, local educational agencies. We'll be looking tonight at some fiscal trends in our state and locally. State and federal revenue are trending downward with the expiration of one-time and restricted resources. And our revenue, fortunately, is trending upward as it relates to LCFF, local control funding formula, and local revenues. This is predominantly our property taxes, and then we do have state categorical programs, which we'll focus in more depth on as we progress through the slide deck. I will focus heavily tonight on the state and federal revenues that are trending downward and how this impacts the overall fiscal health of the district. Next slide. Here we're looking at some key budget assumptions. We're going to start off with our estimated local control funding formula base and property taxes. This does come directly out of the multi-year projections that I present to the board at first and second interim, as well as when we do an October revision and budget revision. On the top chart, we'll see only revenue limit sources. The revenue limit sources are made up of all sources noted in lines starting with LCFF current year. Excuse me. This is a base allocation for PGUSD, which we receive per ADA. In summary, the LCFF current year base is the state's contribution, particularly in the form of supplemental and concentration grants. Some other lines to highlight are the secure and unsecured tax roll, which you will see there. This is our local property taxes. You can see the trend in the revenue limit sources from 21-22 through 24-25. The district had a net increase of just over 6 million. This is an average of around 1.5 million year over year and around 5% of new revenue. And you can see each one of those columns, 21, 22, 22, 23, 23, 24. Those are all unaudited actuals. And being that we're at first interim, I'm showing you the revenue projections at first interim there. Also note that we do carry forward assumptions, which is the very next column there, 2025 and 26 and 2026, 27. Those are for our multi-year projections, and we always carry forward around a 5.5% increase over prior fiscal year of projected property tax revenue. Next, we can break down the federal revenue sources. That's the next chart down below. The biggest takeaway from this slide is the reduction of federal revenue from 21-22 through 24-25, which is just over 1.1 million. You'll see that the district's primary loss of federal revenue is noted in all other revenue line. That's toward the bottom. Excuse me. We do not project in 24-25 in the MYPs the federal revenue assumptions because they're nearly 1/3 of the revenue received in prior years. We will highlight on future slides the breakdown of this revenue and how it has been tied to program expenditures. And I will take a pause there for questions before we move forward.
Quick question, just because we covered it recently, but the diminishment, I thought it was an LCFF that we're going to be getting this year because of the high school attendance days. Is that reflected on?
It is. Okay, great question. You would actually see that in the 25-26 multi-year projection there in the top line of 2,505,456. That is correct. The district will receive around $140,000 reduction in our LCFF base, but that was not reported at first interim where this data was captured. A great question. Thank you.
I'm trying to keep track of all the
Yeah,
up and
a lot of
down
numbers. Yeah, so that revenue will be reduced by just over the $140,000, which is associated with the lack of instructional minutes or the deficiency of instructional minutes at the high school last year in 23-24. Yes.
Going back a page, or not a statistic or anything, but the other districts that we compare ourselves to in terms of budget and that sort of thing, what are they and how many are there?
Okay, so we have 6 comparable districts in our county. However, there's only one comparable district fiscally to ours in our county, which is Carmel, because they are a basic aid school district. There are other basic aid school districts in the state of California. What I will say is that this school district's assessed valuation and property tax revenue trends much lower than many of those other basic aid districts. In fact, it's lower than most, if not all. And that's related to some other topics I'll talk about tonight as it relates to our assessed valuation, how the district receives its property taxes, and why our district, because of Prop 13, kind of has about a 60% cap on property tax receipts that we receive. I'll get into that in further detail.
I have a question on that same topic about comparable LEAs. You threw out a statistic and I tried to write it down, but I wasn't fast enough about us being, I think, 7% higher. Can you say that again and explain it so I can?
Right. So this district is at, I think I have us at 87% or 88%. It's 87 to 88% of our overall expenditures. It actually is trending down or tied to salary and benefits, which is around 7% higher than most districts and other LEAs, not only comparable LEAs. Most districts carry around 79 to 81% of their total expenditures in health and welfare and salary and benefits.
Thank you. That's clear now. I appreciate the response.
Would that be Carmel? Is Carmel's the same as ours then?
They're lower. Okay, next slide. Now we're taking a look at our estimated state revenue and categorical resources. This is a big table, right? There's a lot to look at there. We do need to highlight that the state categorical revenues are similar to those already presented at first interim. The takeaway from this chart is that all of the blank cells begin in 2023, 24, and 24, 25. You can see as you move across, there's a lot of blank cells there where we once had revenue. We do not have revenue moving forward. It's around $1 million in loss in ongoing state revenue cumulative, and we will be taking a deeper dive. I'm just kind of setting us up for the deeper dive later when I'm showing you these, because these are part of the multi-year projections. Myself and fiscal officer Carly Adams will break down the all other state restricted revenue and the all other unrestricted revenues by reviewing the board exhibits A and B that were in your packet. We're not doing that yet, but to go into further detail, we'll get to that later in the slide deck. Next slide. All right, so here we're looking at our estimated local revenue. The last summary slide, of course, covered estimated local revenue for PGUSD. Local revenue is broken down as noted in lines in the lines in this chart. The largest reduction of revenues comes from SELPA, which is a special education local planning area, which is revenue received from our county SELPA. You can see at the bottom, PGUSD has 2 years of increased revenue, and the 24-25 year has sort of resettled to the revenue amount shown in 21-22. And you can see that by looking at the bottom there. So in 21-22, we were just over 2.6 million in local revenue. Now we're at just over 2.6 million in local revenue. You can see that, or sorry, 2.8 million in local revenue, but you'll see in the multi-year projections, it's kind of trending flat. So we did have a bubble of revenue in the 22-23 fiscal year and 23-24, and now we've sort of resettled. Next slide.
Can I ask you a quick
Yeah,
question
yeah.
on that one? Sorry, I'll try not to.
Oh,
But
no.
how did we get $86 of parcel taxes? I did not think we had parcel taxes on our district.
Yeah, from 2021, that's a great question because we don't have parcel taxes. It might be an error in reporting from 21-22.
Okay, I mean, that would be something hopefully we can discuss in terms of what parcel taxes could look like if they were put on, right? That'll be
I'll also highlight on this slide, you can see sale of equipment. That's an error also in the first interim reporting, which will be resolved at second interim report, which we bring forward in March. So there wasn't 332,971 in sale of equipment, but that was what was reported at first interim. It will be revised at second interim.
Josh, is line 8699 or no 80? Well, the special education / Dawn. I don't know what that is.
Donations.
Donations.
Mhm.
So is special education dependent on some sort of enrollment, or that is basically how that revenue gathered?
Yeah, so there's 2 lines there. We have other local revenue restricted and unrestricted. If we're looking at the 300,439 and 283,940, you can see that it has trended kind of. Well, the unrestricted side jumped heavily from 21-22 up to 24-25. And I would have to get back to you on the specifics of that breakdown. One area to note is if you look at the SELPA funding, we have been trending downward in the SELPA funding, and that's really a highlight in the local revenue assumptions for this year and trending forward into the multi-year projections. We're still trending at just over 1.2 million. So revenue is in decline in that area. And I will talk a little bit more when we get into the unrestricted expenditure side, our unrestricted contribution from the general fund that goes towards special education and how much higher that is year over year once we get to that slide. Slide 8. So this is kind of a breakdown of the understanding of new revenue, new property tax revenue. When we look at year over year, I mentioned earlier that this district on average realizes around 5% new property tax revenue from the property taxes derived in our local boundary area. I like to use this as an example of the new revenue calculation, which highlights the following things. Number one, PGUSD only realizes around 1.5% of new revenue above the cost of doing business year over year. That's what's highlighted at the bottom of 24-25 and 25-26. The new revenue is necessary to cover items such as step and column, which is the natural movement across the salary schedule for our employee groups, increase to the cost of employee state pensions such as STRS and PERS, then that's associated with step and column movement of our employee groups only. So that's not an indication of an increase to STRS and PERS. It's simply the step and column movement increases salaries, therefore STRS and PERS is increased associated with that step and column movement. Also, the increase to goods and services, utilities, which is driven in part by the increasing cost of the consumer pricing index. And I give you kind of an example of that percentage for this year. Construction cost index and various other rising variables contribute to the increased cost of goods and services. On average, Pacific Grove Unified receives around 1.5% in new property tax revenue that can be used for the following things: employee unit bargaining negotiations, increased our statutory obligation to STRS and PERS, So for example, right now, STRS and PERS is sitting at, STRS is at 19.1%. PERS is sitting at 27.3%. There is an increase projected in the school services dartboard associated with a STRS increase of 0.35%. A lot of numbers there. What I'm trying to suggest here is that is not factored into new revenue. It's not. If I put that number up, 0.3% of our total expenditures associated with our PERS, our classified staff, it would take away a couple $100,000 more of that 1.5% bottom line. So the summary of this slide is simply that property tax revenue is dramatically reduced by the simple cost of doing business year over year. And I'll pause right there for questions. Correct. Sorry. Next slide. All right. So now that we've given some general highlights of revenue assumptions and makeup, I want to shift our focus to expenditure assumptions. For the 25-26 fiscal year, some key points to consider are any potential salary and benefit changes. The district has not reached an agreement on salary and benefits with our employee groups. PGUSD as a basic K district does not receive a general COLA or cost of living adjustment that we could pass along to our employee groups in the form of an increase to salary or health and welfare. One area to be focused on as a goal or priority to our board and employee groups is trying to align district health and welfare contribution, which I will refer to as our CAP, to the MCSIG PPO 60 annual plan. That's something that we've discussed with our groups, essentially trying to get the district contribution up to a level where our employee groups can have an insurance policy that is fully covered by the district. That's one of our goals. In prior years, it was a lower plan. It was a PPO 40. We're aspiring to get to PPO 60 now. Last year, the bargaining units did make headway associated with health and welfare cap, and the unfortunate reality of the double-digit increase to health and welfare premiums has put us in the situation that we are in this year, which is rising costs of healthcare, and the district's cap was not enough to meet those increases. The district's per employee or employee plus family cap is listed below. You can see that in the chart on the bottom. PGUSD and our bargaining units have been trying to keep up with the increasing cost of healthcare in our area, and you can see the district contribution per employee group is listed below. Just a quick example, PGTA for 24-25, the district contribution for an employee is $10,200. Employee plus family is $14,820, and you can see across employee groups how that fleshes out from our CSEA group, confidential group, and our management group. I'd like to make a note of MCSIG. A lot of folks aren't quite sure exactly if they're our insurer or they're our insurance provider. To give you just a kind of a breakdown of what MCSIG is and what they do, the Municipalities, College and Schools Insurance Group is a joint powers authority that was formed in 1982 to establish and maintain health benefit programs and share pool risk sharing, as well as shared expenses for health management for its members. So it's a joint powers authority where they basically go to the open market and they're trying to buy insurance for our group, which is not just Pacific River Unified or even the 24 districts in Monterey County. It expands beyond. MCSIG oversees the health and welfare portfolio for where we had a 2024 one-time assessment to our members based on a 200% increase in claims this year. The district share of that was $209,872. You see that in the note there in the bottom. The increase to health and welfare premiums would be passed on to the employee groups in rate increases, but PGUSD, like all LEAs in MCSIG, absorbed the increase without a negotiated or increased settlement to health and welfare. This was a one-time payment to MCSIG, but it's indicative of the double-digit rate hike projected for the 25-26 year. We don't have current projected rates for the 25-26 year, but they are trending higher than this year, which was 12.47%.
Just two quick questions. Are those percentages compounding? Is it 12.47 and then 15.6 more? But because of the one-time payment, is the 15.6 on top of the original amount? And then I have a second quick question.
It is, well, it's compounding. So rates went up 12.47% this year,
Which we contributed a one-time payment.
plus the one-time payment,
That's the one-time payment.
which if you want to look at it that way from our district's employee groups, it's around a half a percent, right? So that the employee groups rate may have went up to 12.97, right? If they had factored in the claims correctly. And then they'll do a reassessment and they'll reestablish rates in June and July for open enrollment in the following year. And I have an understanding that those rates are probably going to be similar or not, or potentially higher than the rate increase this year.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then the second question, just minutia, but the 209,872 payment, which fund does that come out of? Because I've not seen that before.
Yeah, it's something that actually has not happened before. It was a surprise. So just to get into the detail on that, if I can, just like our school district we develop a budget, which is based on projections, right? They develop a budget, McSig does, based on projected claims. And within the first quarter of the year, the claims were so high that not only were they in excess of the projected payout of claim amounts, they dipped into the entire reserves that McSig had to cover those increases, to the point where they had to go out to their member group and ask for a one-time assessment. And every single school district in this county, as well as I know every district in our county had their pro rata share. Ours was much lower than many, but they all had to make that payment to continue to maintain solvency within McSig for this year.
So which item are we going to end up paying? Is it going to be out of unrestricted, restricted?
It was paid for out of unrestricted. Yep.
This might not be germane to this, but just for people listening, there are limited options for McSig alternatives in our area. Is that correct?
There are 3 options, and the district is evaluating all 3 options as we speak. In fact, we have some really good data that payroll brought in just this week on one of the other alternatives we have to, I'm going to say to McSig. Remember, McSig is a joint powers authority, right? So they buy Blue Cross of California or California's Valued Trust. So there's California's Valued Trust. There's also PERS, which we also know as a retirement system. There's also a PERS a program for health and welfare benefits. So we're evaluating all 3, California Valued Trust, CVT, McSig, and PERS right now to determine what's in the best interest of this district moving forward. The assessment that we're doing will be brought forward to our employee groups as well. And then the district has to make a determination by June as to whether or not we stay with McSig or we move to one of the other insurance provider groups, which would take place in January of 2026. So we would notify McSig in June if we decide to opt out for movement into a new provider in January of 2026, which is open enrollment.
Thanks.
Slide 10. So now we've given some general context on the district expenditures. Let's shift our attention to salaries. On the chart, you can see that PGUSD certificated salaries, which include administration, certificated admin, have been increasing year over year. You will notice the small dip in 24-25, which reflects some of the efforts made by the board to include the SERP and by our business office to reduce vacancies held in the budget. Let me be clear about that. We have tried to reduce the amount of vacancies that are realized as expenditures in our budget until those vacancies are realized. So you reduce the number of vacancies in the budget, it reduces your expenditures. That doesn't mean we're eliminating positions. It just means we're not carrying those vacancies in the budget, therefore potentially hyperinflating expenditures. So please note in the multi-year projections, the district is only picking up the increase associated with step and column. There's no projection built in for 25-26 or 26-27 for negotiated settlement with our employee groups. You can see in the 25-26 column, you'll see the highlighted green 1.62%, and then all the way down. That is our increase to step and column percentage associated, and that's how we build our multi-year projections. Next slide. Oh, sorry.
Regarding the vacancies, who makes those decisions on what vacancies get eliminated and which ones you retain?
Yeah, sure. It's a joint conversation between the business office and human resources. If we've been carrying a vacancy forward year to year to year, right, then we know it's time to fold the vacancy in and remove that as an expenditure. If we're having trouble filling a position, even during the current fiscal year, we've advertised for a position. We continue to advertise for a position. We're not getting any qualified candidates. At interim, first interim, second interim, or our October budget revision, we may reduce the vacancy out again to not carry forward those expenditures. That doesn't mean that we can't make a revision again. We can. If we end up filling the position, we'll still fly for the positions, but we're not carrying those expenditures. And again, I use the term hyperinflating, but it can be looked at as you're carrying money forward in the budget that's an expenditure that's not being realized. So we're trying to reduce that, to try to be more realistic around what our budget really is. Welcome.
I apologize. We can't, we have to wait to the end for comment. I really apologize. It's not personal, but it's the structure of how the special meeting.
Good news. I had that question too.
Okay.
I was curious about why these aren't, why there are no numbers in 22 through 24 through 25, basically. For the substitutes and
It's getting rolled into pupil support. I think they rolled up into 1,220. They'll roll up into the 1,200s. Sorry, that's pupil support restricted, pupil support unrestricted. And then the hourly, that all rolls up into the 1,100s, right? So if you have a teacher who has a salary and they do hourly on top of it, it rolls up into the 1,100 at the top line. So your restricted, unrestricted teachers line, it's all rolling up into those numbers. Did you want to comment, Carly? Okay, she's nodding in approval. Okay. All right, slide 11. Now we're going to take a look at our classified salaries by object. On the chart, you can see generally the PGUSD classified salaries, which include administration as well as confidential staff, have been increasing year over year. There's been a larger shift in the expenditures in classified salaries, primarily due to the increased classified support at school sites, such as noon duty crossing guards, instructional assistants, and paraprofessionals. Also, it's important to note that the district has been shifting expenditures that have been sunsetting from restricted resources back to the unrestricted general fund. So that's also something you're seeing here. You will note that in the multi-year projections, that reflects just over 9.5 million in classified salaries for 26-27. And just like the prior slide, we have a column there for step and column movement, but there is no projection for negotiated settlements with our employee groups, our classified employee groups either. All right, next slide. Now we're going to take a look at the federal and state budget impacts. The district's beginning the process of the 25-26 budget development this month. To do so, the district must consider not only our increase year over year as a basic aid district and property taxes, but also how the state and federal revenue projections impact programs. Governor Newsom's budget was just released and the district has not dove into it. To determine projected cuts or expansion of program. I will bring this item forward to the board in February. It's a regular item we bring to the board in February prior to bringing it forward again in the May revision. For now, it does seem like in the governor's budget, there is a projected funded cost of living adjustment, a COLA of 2.43%. The COLA will only be applied to certain programs that PGUSD receives revenue on. I'll just give you one example, the Universal Meals Program. Not every categorical program funded that the district receives state revenue on receives a COLA. The COLA is only applied to certain categorical programs. So we will keep an eye on the governor's budget as it's evaluated and as it progresses through the legislative process. PGUSD receives federal funding through Title I and Title II, but as outlined in the previous slides, our federal revenue has been in decline over the past 2 years. Much of the one-time restricted revenue that was tied to COVID-19 pandemic has sunset. Ongoing revenue has sunset. Moving forward, in this presentation tonight, we will discuss in more detail what are one-time versus ongoing revenue sources and how they can impact program when funds sunset. With all of the one-time revenue generated from both federal and state, maintaining sustainable programs without a large impact to the unrestricted general fund can and will be challenging. The board and district has already taken some actions to buffer the loss in revenue, but the 25-26 budget year is an anomaly. And some more difficult decisions must be considered by the board and district administration moving forward. Next slide. So here we'll take a look at the one-time versus ongoing funding. In short, one-time restricted funding.
Can I ask a quick one on the state budget? I tried to review the CSBA briefing on the government budget that happened. They were saying that like there was a proposal to hold off Prop 98.
Yeah.
Would that affect us as non-LCFF? You should say, how would that affect us if they basically due to uncertainty in the election transition?
It could affect the COLA percentage tied to categorical funding. It could affect the potential categorical programs that are unfunded through COLA moving forward. So for example, Prop 28, which was the music arts program funding, that could be affected right now. That is an ongoing categorical revenue stream, not set to sunset. But if the Prop 98 guarantee is not met, there would be program cuts. We just don't know what they are yet.
Can I ask a question about the positions that were created with one-time funds? Do we have an idea of the numbers on the certificated and the classified side of just what those jobs were that were created, not necessarily what may be being examined to reduce? Do we have an idea?
We do. I'm going to cover that in
Oh.
detail. It's okay. And I think it's like 3 slides from now.
Great.
Yeah. I'm just kind of teeing you up for the understanding. So what's much of the one-time funding that PGUSD received was to address the following items: learning loss mitigation, health and safety protocols, technology and connectivity, mental health and social emotional support, extended learning time and summer programs, teacher and staff support, and facility upgrades. And I will pause there if Dr. Hagquist or Chief Rogaman wanted to kind of expand upon that topic for us, if you'd like.
Offer an example. I served as a TOSA for 2 years, and my role was under that learning loss mitigation and support. We were tracking data and tracking students to see how the learning was being affected and trying to implement programs to mitigate the loss that was happening within our district and across the state. We had programs like A through G improvement that came from these types of funds. And so a lot of what I was doing a couple of years ago was part of that. And we got eliminated that position that I formerly held.
Right, when the COVID money came forward, a large focus of that COVID money was for the district to address the learning loss that had occurred while students were home doing distance learning. And so where the district made the largest contribution to try to address that learning loss was in hiring additional people to try to increase the amount of small group instruction that could be done. Sometimes that meant an increase to the hours of an instructional aide so that that aide could be present more often in a classroom to be able to assist with that the small group instruction. Also, some of those funds were spent to fund an additional intervention teacher as well as an intervention aide, because we knew that the number of students that would require reading intervention at the lower grades was going to be greater. And so with that in the flux of funds, those temporary jobs were hired for us to be able to address that. Another, example of that expenditure was we understood, the mental health needs of our children as they returned from COVID. And so we brought on board the mental health therapists. During the COVID times, there was one at the high school and one serving both of the elementary schools. And then this year, we also added one at the middle school. The funding for those positions expired at the end of last year. So all of those 3 positions have been absorbed by the general fund. And I hope I'm not stealing your message.
No. Perfect. Yeah, and I mean, we'll address those as examples as we move forward. So as of 24-25, all of the related one-time funding is now gone. And much of the funding still carries expenditures that the district must address in this fiscal year. To do so could mean the reduction of program expenditures or encroachment on the unrestricted general fund. These are things we're here to talk about tonight. Ongoing funding, however, so I'm going to move on. Ongoing funding, however, of our resources, we can count on year to year. There still may be reductions to these resources, but much of those state and federal ongoing non-one-time funding sources are still being realized by LEAs. Dr. Hazen brought up a question just a few minutes ago as it relates to categorical funding. We plan to receive that revenue as an ongoing revenue source because it was an approved ongoing categorical program. That doesn't necessarily mean we will. That's why we have to monitor the state of the budget when the budget is released, the May revise, and when the budget is adopted. Not all ongoing funding, as I mentioned before, comes with a COLA attached to it. And therefore, again, the district needs to make decisions regarding the increased cost of programs tied to ongoing funding without a COLA. Next slide. So here we go. We were just talking about this. Just going to show you a couple of examples of one-time funded resources that the revenue was tied to offset expense. We have first and foremost at the top, we're talking about ESSER, that's the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Act. The district realized just over $2.3 million in revenue. And as you can see, the revenue was offset with expenditures of the same amount. That's what you're supposed to do with restricted revenue. You budget for the exact amount received. So revenue and expense have to offset. PGUSD utilized ESSER for some positions that Chief Rogeman just brought up. I have FTE on one side, that's full-time equivalent. So that may not be a full individual. It may be a fraction of a person's position or an increase to hours. So the ESSER funding added 2 resource teachers, which were partially funded, the RSPs. So half an FTE, if you break that down to each of those. The 2 TOSA positions that Dr. Hagquist just mentioned that the district brought on board, that was funded through ESSER. There was an increase to 6 elementary instructional assistants, fractional FTEs. They total to 1.38, but basically to increase those hours to address learning loss and provide for smaller group instruction at the elementary level. The 2.0, which was 2 mental health therapists. Another item that another resource the district used was the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant. That was to fund 1 full-time intervention teacher and 1 half-time instructional assistant. Now that we covered that data, I'll take a quick pause for questions.
Another one, is there a hope for a new emergency block grant coming in the?
These are the one-time restricted resources.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if there was some potential for more learning recovery to be passed.
And again, I kind of default back to, let's see where the governor, I mean, we've seen a summative release of the governor's budget, but not details yet. I just looked into it today and through school services, and there's just not enough there to find out what categoricals are being funded, what the COLAs attached are, and if there's new categoricals on the horizon or grants available to our district.
Thank you for asking that, Elliot, because that was going to be my question too, is what's on the horizon. And as far as just clarification of which positions have been absorbed by the district, you said that 2 mental health therapists, and have the rest gone away then?
Yeah, so Elliot, Lewis, next slide. So this is what we're looking at. So the impact of the unrestricted general fund with the positions that were retained. So those positions that were shown on the previous slide, these are the ones that were retained. The others did go away, right? So the 1.38 6 instructional assistants, the increase to the hours, that was shifted into the general fund. The 2.0, 2 mental health therapists, you can see 311,543 was shifted into the unrestricted general fund. And 1 mental health therapist was added at the middle school. That wasn't initially funded through one-time restricted resources. It was a need that was requested of our district for student support. So that was folded into the unrestricted general fund. You can see that in the bold there, that's a total encroachment into the unrestricted general fund of 577.73 that did not exist before. So we increased the unrestricted general fund expenditures without having the revenue to offset.
I just want to make a contextual comment on that, because that was in result of a number of, whether it was healthy kid surveys and stuff, where we were seeing some pretty plummeting numbers. And we as a board at the time, along with the district, agreed that, based on the Maslow's hierarchy, is that right? We need to keep the students whole before they can even begin to learn. So I just want to give that context to it. It's not like we did it without recognizing the cost, but we did feel it was an important step to take as a district.
And the MHTs work with students directly, or as are they seeing kids directly, or are they working school-wide? Basically, how many cases do they have, or is that?
Yeah, so we have a mental health therapist at the high school, dedicated to the high school, 1 that's itinerant at the 2 elementary schools, and then 1 is dedicated to the middle school. Numbers of student contact, maybe I could default to Buck, maybe not on the numbers, but.
Actually, I think Executive Director Cork Anthony is online with us, right?
Oh.
Because she was in San Diego for a conference this week. So I'm hoping that she is there and could maybe just speak a little to that. Executive Director Cork Anthony, are you there with us?
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Oh, it's good to hear your voice.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, board, cabinet. Yes, the mental health therapists do actually work with students and individual and group, depending on the circumstances of the student, whatever their needs are, within a general education setting. And they also actually provide supports to some students with IEPs in terms of crisis and support with the staff. So they are serving the schools, for check-ins with students as well. But they do carry a caseload in terms of just supporting specific students that may require more intensive needs on campus.
And just more context setting, I believe a couple of months ago, I learned that the IEP cases or students with IEPs have risen like 33% or something like that in the past couple of years, just to address the need for these.
Right. So the students are IEPs, the mental health therapists. So there's two sets of mental health therapists. We have the mental health therapists that the three we're talking about that were under general education fund. Then there's also mental health therapists who only serve students with IEPs, and they are through a contract through Monterey County Behavioral Health. And those are specifically for students with IEPs. And they carry a caseload combined of about 50 or 52.
I can address numbers. I was just looking at them. So this district, to follow up to your question, Trustee Wax, this district has around 290, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Clark Anthony, 290 students on IEPs and around 180, 150 students on 504s. So if you total that up, that's about 1/3 of our district.
Yes, we do support about 1/3 in terms of students with disabilities. Thank you for that, Josh. We do actually support about close to a third of our students with supports in various levels of services. So it is about 465, 470. I don't have it in front of me, but yeah, it's about that number.
And I would suggest the rationale behind that would be a number of things. Number one, we have some of the very best special education instructors and support staff of any LEA in this county. And I was at the county office for a long time and I've seen it. So I can attest to that. I think that what we're seeing are families that are moving into the area specifically to come and attend our Mod Severe and STC program at our school sites. And then, the other component is potentially over identification of students. But moreover, it's because we are like really one of the very best special ed programs in the county. And I feel good saying that. And I feel like that's a fact.
Josh, on the mental health therapists, they sign contracts, correct, for the year, or how did they get employed for getting onto the, what do they call it, the whole payment?
Yeah, they're not
salary schedule.
They're not
They're
not an independent contractor.
They're not.
If that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
No, there's a salary schedule for the mental health therapists that exists. And I don't know if they follow a unit. They do not currently follow a CSCA or PGTA unit. They're kind of on their own. These are licensed professionals, so it's kind of a professional group. If that answers the question, but yeah, there's a salary schedule that we have specifically for our mental
So
health.
we created a schedule for those services or that credentialing person.
Correct. Okay. Welcome. Just one more thing to note on this slide. For our projected budget development, which we are getting into in 25-26, there is another potential impact from expiring restricted resources. This is basically the last of the restricted expiring resources. And that is our reading intervention program. So I have that highlighted down there below with the teacher and the 0.5 FTE instructional assistant. Cumulatively what this has done, I mean, these are wonderful programs for our district. These help out our students. That's what we are here to do. But this is an impact of about, $785,000 to our unrestricted general fund that was not an expenditure before on the unrestricted general fund side, and there is no revenue to offset. So that's the big takeaway from this slide.
The 785.
Correct. So
Oh,
570,
okay.
right. Currently this year in our 24-25 budget, we're carrying 577.73. And then down below the 213,473, that's being carried on a restricted revenue resource this year, but it expires at the end of this year. So if we want to maintain those resources and programs for our students, it would increase the unrestricted general fund obligation.
And the intervention teacher goes between campuses?
Correct. Itinerary. Yep. All right. This is a breakdown of our, this is a table that highlights the changes in revenue from fiscal year 2020 to, or 2021. I'm just going to say 2021 to 24-25. And you can see these are the restricted revenues that have been continuing to decline over the course of the last 4 years. Just looking at the bottom, you can see in 2021, district had just over 2.5 million in revenue from these restricted resources. And then we kind of had a balloon in 21-22, 22-23 of, just over 3.8, over 3.6, 23-24 dropped a little bit, 3.4, and now we're down to 2.895. And in my multi-year projections, we're showing this to be in steady decline. Next slide. Okay, so in your packet, you have Exhibit A. That's a lot. They are spreadsheets. There's a lot of data there. I'm going to try to highlight both Exhibit A and Exhibit B. Exhibit A being unrestricted, Exhibit B being restricted. We'll start with Exhibit A, which is unrestricted. The two exhibits are basically, they further break down our unrestricted and restricted revenue and expense. So let's take a look at the Exhibit A, unrestricted revenue and expense, and I'm going to highlight some of the lines for you. The document has line numbers on the left-hand side. It's not up on your screen right now, but it is accessible. And actually, Lewis, if you click the link, it might pop up on the screen there. Back one and click there we go. I don't know if anyone's going to want to look at that, but there it is. Okay, everyone has it at the table. So the document has the line number on the left-hand column, then the title of the revenue on the left-hand column, and I will be referring to those line items as we move through the next few slides. So listed is the comparison again from 2021 through current year. You can see the PVVAR, that's the variance year over year. So what is the change? You can see at the very top there, just as an example, line 1, beginning balance. 2020-21, just over 4.9 million, 21-22, just over 5.4. That's a 17% increase. That's kind of how we're reading this. If we're looking strictly at the unrestricted revenue, that's starting on line 3 and working its way down to line 22. Just going to highlight a couple of lines that really do jump out. Line 22, which is all other local revenue, is down by 109% over actuals from the 23-24 year. Line 23, which is the contributions from the unrestricted general fund, has increased by 13%. So 90% of that total on line 23 is the unrestricted general fund contribution to special education. I do have our fiscal officer here today, and if she'd like to comment on the makeup of the unrestricted general fund contribution to special education.
Okay. So that contribution, the 7.9, let's see, we have 7.8 of it is the SPED contribution. SPED is expected to receive an apportionment of 1.5 million, and the remaining 6.1 is going to be covered with a contribution from unrestricted. SPED expense breakdown, 6.4 million of it is in salary and benefits, with the remaining 1.4 million in operational expenses, which include legal fees, sub-agreement for services, and professional consulting fees. Okay.
Questions on the special ed contribution before we move on? That was line 23. It's what we were just talking about. I mean, so really the takeaway there is if you look at 2020 and 21, bless you. The district was just over 5.1 million in its special ed the contribution from the unrestricted general fund. It's now just under 8 million. I could go into a lot further detail on what the requirements are associated with special education contribution, but it's really simple it's simply put, We have what's called a maintenance of effort that the district must meet every single year, which means that the district must have $1 more in expenditures than we had the prior year. Now, if we have a decline in enrollment, that does not necessarily carry the same weight. We do not have to go up by $1, but special ed programs, maintenance of effort require us to increase the spending year over year. You cannot decrease the spending as one of the tests.
Is that a federal rule?
State.
State.
Yeah, the MOE, that's a whole, I could give a whole discussion on that. I'm not going to get into it, but there's basically 4 areas you look at for special education maintenance of effort. One of them is increase in expenditures year over year. And if you don't meet 3 of the 4, you fail. And you don't want to fail. Okay, so we're still on this page here. We're still looking at unrestricted revenue. I'm sorry, no, we're not. I apologize. The total unrestricted revenue. So down at the bottom, one thing to highlight, the next line, Lewis, 31. Our total unrestricted revenue has increased by 5.5 million cumulative from 2020-21 to 24-25. That's a really good thing. We've seen an increase in revenue. Let's take a look at the expenditures. Just slide down a little bit, Lewis. There you go. Okay. On the unrestricted expenditure side, I'm going to highlight a few lines. Let's first look at line 32. It's up at the top there. All right. Other classified salaries. Other classified salaries has increased by 49% over actuals. These are positions that were once funded from restricted that are now impacting the unrestricted general fund. I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about examples. Mental health therapists, BASRP, rec leads, occupational therapists, crossing guards, campus supervisors. Those are examples. There's many, but that is what makes up the 49% increase year over year. Looking at line 36, that is our health and welfare increase, and that's due to the 24-25 health and welfare cap increase. So when we negotiate with our units, and we provide an increase to the district contribution, whatever percentage that might be, it equates to a dollar amount. So that's part of that increase, as well as the 209,872 assessment from McSig, which I mentioned earlier. Line 39 is our retiree benefits, and those are down due to the health and welfare revenue abatement for our retirees' health and welfare. Line 51 is we'll note the substantive increase in professional consulting from 21-22 through 24-25. This increase over time is attributed to district-wide professional development, legal fees, many other items. And for this, I'm going to hand it over to Carly again, and she's going to give you a breakdown because it is a pretty big jump.
So over the last 4 years, legal fees have almost doubled on the unrestricted side, running roughly 500,000 a year. 500,000 last year. Another part or component of that is the train interest repayment that we have, which has doubled since 21-22 and is running about 269,000 last year. In 23-24, we incurred a $314,000 CERP fee for retirees. That was year 1 of 5 and will continue into fiscal year 27-28. And the remaining 477,000 last year was just other professional contracted services, a large majority of it being for professional development as well.
That's just a good question on the TRAN. I mean, I thought the TRAN was a pretty standard payment because we're just pre-borrowing what we haven't yet received from the state. So how is that going up? Is it because we're borrowing more or?
So the cost of issuance is based on market rate.
It's all interest rates.
Yep, it's all interest rates. Yep. Yeah.
Sorry. About, this isn't the largest thing, but the approved textbooks, just as a newcomer, do we have to re-license those each year? Or
the answer is no.
The textbooks that typically have a contract that lasts like 6 or 7 years. And so when we renew something at the high school, there is no mandatory renewal schedule that we have. What we did was we leveraged some of the one-time money that we received from the government during COVID to try to update some of our purchases of the textbooks. The textbook budget is set at the beginning of the year, and then it also gets augmented by the lottery funds that we bring in. And so it depends on the curriculum that you purchase. Some of them will have a term of 5 to 7 years. Some of them will be for 2 years. Some of them will be for 3. So the renewals come at different times, if that answers your question.
So looking down at total expenses line, I guess it's 71 there. What you'll see is that total expenditures have increased by just over 7.3 million cumulative from 2021 to 24-25. And really one takeaway here to note is that the district has been carrying a deficit relationship with unrestricted revenue to expense. Our expenditures have been higher year to year, higher than our revenue that we've been bringing in. Therefore, on the unrestricted side, we have been deficit spending, and that's a relationship that has existed for some time. Next slide. Sorry, not next slide. Next worksheet. So, and this just summarizes what we're talking about. Let's go to the next worksheet. Exhibit B. Yeah, Lewis has it. That's Exhibit A again. Oh,
Second tab.
no, I think it's
Link's wrong, but
the link might be wrong.
yeah, but
Oh, hit the link and go to the second tab. There you go.
they're restricted.
There it is. Okay. Good looking out. Okay, so here we're going to take a look again, just like we did at restricted revenues and restricted expenditures. We're going to start out by looking at line 5, all other federal revenue, which is down by 150% over actuals from 23-24. Since 2021, PGUSD's lost over 1.3 million in federal revenue, and that is specifically tied to ESSER, which I mentioned before, ESSER 1, 2, and 3, CARES Act, ELO, and other restricted programs. Line 8, take and highlight that. All other state local revenue has decreased by 19% over the 23-24 year. This resource has been in decline, as you can see, for the last 3 fiscal years. The total restricted revenue has increased by 1.3 million cumulative over the 2021 through 24-25 year, which when we get into revenue, actually, I'll just highlight it now. So yes, the revenue increased over those 4 years, but the expenditures increased by 4.4 million. Back to the deficit relationship that we're having with expense and revenue. But I would like to still break down and continue to look through some of these other items here. Stop that. Sorry. Oh, no, next slide. Now we're on slide 19. Or no, sorry. Line 22. Other classified salaries are down by 46% on the restricted side over 23-24. These are restricted positions that expired with restricted funding, and those were shifted to the general fund, as I've mentioned earlier. Books and supplies, this is line 31. Line 31 is up 93% due to previously unbudgeted local library specific monies and grants that were encouraged. We are currently encouraging our sites to utilize first, again, back to restricted and unrestricted. We encourage those restricted dollars to be spent first before sites use their unrestricted general fund allotment or contribution. Contribution is the wrong word. Budgeted item. We want them to use the restricted first. So in this case, our library books and supplies, they were pulling from unrestricted, being paid for out of unrestricted when we had a restricted pot of money that could be used. My fiscal officer to my left here is very diligent about that this year, and she has meetings multiple times a month with our programs and our sites, specifically to address spending down the restricted dollars first, so as to avoid the encroachment to the general fund. Let's take a look at line 32. It's materials and supplies, which is up 64%. And that's due to the increase of the associated carryover from local resources from the prior year that was not budgeted. So if we had expenditures that were not budgeted in the prior year, we carried those forward. So it's just around 715,000. Line 39, you can note the substantive increase in professional consulting from 21-22 through 24-25, just like we looked at on the prior slide of unrestricted. This is made up of legal services associated with claims, investigations, and special education settlements and placement. And going to hand it back to Carly to kind of break that down a little further for you on the restricted side.
Just as Josh mentioned, yeah, SPED does account for a good chunk of those restricted dollars. That's the one we give the contribution to from unrestricted. This year they have 1.1 million budgeted for healthcare services, a contract emeritus, legal services, positive behavior. We also have ongoing and major maintenance that gets rolled into restricted as well, and we have 110,000 budgeted there for their professional consulting fees. And then other local revenue we're getting in from the sites, we have contracts budgeted in there as well.
The site assessment plan, or basically like the preparation for the bond and that sort of thing, that was part of the consulting money to do the facilities maintenance plan and that sort of thing.
That was unrestricted. It wasn't restricted. It would have been in the unrestricted expenditures, which we covered on the other slide or other exhibit.
Josh, with special ed, we get monies from the county to help with that, right?
Yeah, we do get we get SELPA. We get
Mhm.
an apportionment from SELPA, and it was one of the earlier slides. We've seen it kind
Yeah.
of tapering a bit.
Do you know why that is?
You know, I've asked the question and I'm waiting for a response, and I don't know if Carly does know the answer either, but we did ask the county. It could be associated with the identified mod severe population. I believe that's what it is tied to. I'm kind of looking to Lauren in the back of the room, but and our mod severe numbers, they've been staying relatively level. Okay, yeah. So I will get back to the board on that, because initially I thought it had to do with our mod severe apportionment from the county through the SELPA. But if our numbers are still going up, but the revenue is going down, that would not make sense.
But does this have to do with FAPE settlements potentially?
No,
Okay, no, okay. Maybe I guess I wasn't sure of that in there.
what's that? Oh, that's fine. Okay. Let's highlight line 44. So line 44 is the indirect cost that has been in decline, because indirect cost is, you know, predominantly associated with our restricted revenue sources. Those are so when the revenue is expiring, so is the indirect that the district charges those resources, right? So it's been in decline because as we're losing revenue, we're losing the indirect. Yeah, exactly. So again, back to what I mentioned earlier, total, the next line down, total expenses, 97. We've increased by 4.4 million over the past 4 years, and PGUSD again on the restricted side is carrying a deficit relationship with revenue and expense. So the caution here on the restricted side is that PGUSD cannot continue to maintain programs that have expiring revenue, or it will dramatically increase the general fund deficit. I mean, that's like a pretty simple takeaway, right? If we continue to maintain programs that are funded out of restricted revenue, and if those programs, they need a source for revenue and funding, and it's shifted to the unrestricted general fund, that begins to increase the deficit, which one of the points tonight we're looking at is ways to decrease our deficit. I'm not making any recommendations. It's just a point that needs to be considered moving forward. Next slide. Actually, let's move back to the slide deck, Lewis. Okay, and let's go to slide 20. All right. So the board and the district must, as a basic aid district, maintain a healthy reserve balance. School board should ensure that reserve policies align with long-term goals and fiscal health. Regular review of reserves can help avoid overaccumulation or depletion of funds. While building reserves, it is important to note or is important for the financial stability, transparency, and communication with our community. Especially if reserves need to be used for specific purposes like restoring programs or addressing shortfalls. Some major areas that we're monitoring include the volatility in local property tax revenue. You can see the kind of the summary of that up there on the board. As an example, if there's a downturn in the real estate market that's just unrealized, the district may realize less property tax revenue because of the downturn in the real estate market. On the other hand, if there's an uptick in the real estate market, assessed valuation tends to climb. More homes being sold at a new market rate increases assessed valuation, which increases property tax. But it's something that we need to monitor. This district has, I mentioned, on average, 5% over year to year in new property taxes. We've had a couple of years where it was higher. There was an 8.9% year in new property taxes. And that was directly tied to the commercial property tax assessment COVID deferrals. We don't see anything like that in the future, but what we do see is potentially the impacts of Prop 19, which essentially creates a situation where the current homes in our market are being assessed at the current market rate, which were formerly capped under Prop 13. If those homes are sold, if those homes are moved to a survivor as a benefit through a trust, that would increase assessed valuation. Other areas to look at is the uncertainty in state funding and federal funding. We talked a lot about that tonight. So even though basic aid districts are largely funded by property taxes, they still receive federal funding for specific programs. Title I and Title II are examples. And we're not exactly certain what's going to happen with Title I and Title II funding moving forward. We're budgeting for it to stay level, but that's something we need to seriously be looking at for our targeted student populations. Another item to look at is pensions and long-term liabilities. The larger reserve can help the district meet its obligations for those long-term liabilities, but our reserves have historically been utilized to stave off the impact to the unrestricted general fund. The reserves have not been used historically to stave off the increase to STRS and PERS, but that is something that we need to be aware of. Right now, STRS, as I mentioned earlier, is flat at 19.1%, and PERS is going up by 0.37%. That's just what's in the proposed budget. It may change, and we're not sure if it's going to this year. But again, that's something that needs to be evaluated. Budget flexibility and financial stability. So we just talked about our TRAN. That's our tax revenue anticipation note, which this district uses for cash flow inflection. What that means is basically the district receives its lion's share of its property taxes. Over 85% of our revenue is property taxes. It comes in December and April. Well, if our last influx of major revenue comes in April, we start to have a cash flow problem, usually around September or October. And it's pretty tough in those couple of months before we see a massive influx of revenue in December, where we get our big influx of property tax receipts. But as President Hazen mentioned, rates fluctuate, the market fluctuate, the TRAN can cost us more, but it unfortunately is something that is necessary for this school district. If property taxes were more spread out throughout the year, which they're not, then we wouldn't have to carry a TRAN. And a TRAN is just basically it's a bridge loan to replenish our cash flow to make sure we can meet our short-term obligations. Lastly, we need to avoid pressure for mid-year cuts. We don't want to ever be in a position where that is the case. Larger reserves can impact, and they can help impact the need for mid-year cuts in the middle of a budget year. Right? If there are substantial issues that take place in the market, and again, we have issues with TRAN issuance, we have issues with receipt of property taxes. So for example, if our property tax revenue in December, instead of coming in at just around 19 million, came in at 14 million, the district's going to have a really big problem to get from December to April. That TRAN that we issued is not going to carry us from December to April. It's designed to carry this district from September through November. So that's something that we need to look at, but that's why the reserve potentially could be used kind of as a TRAN to span us into that next property tax influx. I'll pause right there.
Got a few here, sorry. You'll hear from me. One question I'll ask, well, I'll make one comment just because the reserve has been something I know we've been discussing the past 2 years a bunch. And, as a board, we've kind of suggested targeting at 10%. And I just don't know if this is the right time for us to discuss that. Probably let you finish first before we come back to it. Okay, I'll just throw that out there because it has been something we mentioned in the past. One question is, how much of a reserve would we need to avoid a TRAN? Is that even possible? It's okay if you need to get back to us, or just even.
Yeah, I would just say that that's not probably not fiscally responsible budgeting.
I'm guessing it'd be like the 60s almost, like 50 or 60% reserve to be able to cover yourself half the year, right?
Right, so I mean, so this district takes we take a $7.5 million not to exceed TRAN is what we take. Do we use every penny of it? Not every year. It's not to exceed, and we only pay interest on what we've used. So that $7.5 million again is a bridge for September, October, November. To not have a TRAN at all, we would need, I would be comfortable with like 20 to 25 million in reserves, knowing that we need 7.5 to bridge those months and then having another,
Right.
layer.
Right, and that's about 50%. If our budget's
Yeah,
49,
that's
that's
right.
about 50%. Okay, just,
Yeah,
because the trend has come up before. The other question is, do we get any interest on our reserve? I'm surprised that's a stupid question. Like, if we have a larger reserve, do we get more? Like, is it,
we
okay, we don't have a high savings yield account with some.
It's capped.
Okay.
no, it's
So I'm trying every dime matters, right? Yeah, I'm trying.
yeah, it's interest like a savings account. It's not the
Right.
our reserves are not being used on the open market to garner interest, like high levels of interest as like being utilized for investments, so to speak.
Last question, again, if it's better to wait till we discuss 10% neighboring district reserve, do we have any numbers on that? I know of you, like you said, Carmel's one of our comparables, so.
Yeah, they're in the 20s. And again, what is a reserve? A reserve is the percent of expenditures for the year, right? So percent on total expenditures. So as you can see, I'll show on the next chart, our reserve percentage and reserve amount have changed over the years dramatically as expenditures increase, right? So I don't know where Carmel is sitting right now. They're high 20s in their percent of reserve, and their expenditures are higher than ours too. So other districts in our county, LCFF districts, are carrying higher than 3%. Remember, the district's reserve statutorily in fact, Lewis, just jump to the next slide, if you could, please. Yeah, so under Ed Code 42-127, the district must maintain a 3% or higher reserve statutorily, right? And there are LCFF districts that are carrying 4% and 5% reserves, 6-8% reserves. But as a basic aid district, to have a single digit reserve, I think is something that we, as a board, as a district, as a community, to start taking a hard look at, because we're looking at this chart here. We just look at 2016 to 17 to 24-25, and you can see the reserve percentage has declined from 17.4% to 8.9%. You can also see the total assigned reserve is somewhat, it tends to be comparable, right? Because expenditures went up, right? So I think that, some of the areas to highlight here are, let me look at my notes, sorry. Reserves are a percentage, I mentioned that overall expenditures, sorry. So at first interim, we have a reserve balance of 4,587,090 and a reserve percentage of 8.9%, which is down from 14%. The reduction of the reserve is a direct result in the deficit spending, right? Every time the district deficit spends, especially on the unrestricted side, it brings down the reserve amount, it brings down the reserve percentage. So to provide just some perspective on the reserve balance, PGUSD has a monthly average payroll of $2.7 million, just over on average. We have $865,000 in health and welfare liability on average monthly. We have just over $600,000 in accounts payable and other liabilities, short-term liabilities monthly. That's a net liability per month on average of just over $4 million of just doing business every month. Sometimes it's 4.6, sometimes it's 4.1, but it's just over $4 million. Our current reserve amount would carry us for 1 month, right? But there's many other factors I mentioned here. The TRAN, I'm not suggesting that all of a sudden we would have to use the reserve to make our short-term liabilities. But when you put it into perspective, it's kind of glaring. It's the fact that the district's 1 month of operations could be covered by a reserve. I think that's something we need to look at.
Sorry. I may have missed this in the rundown on the Exhibit B, but is there a reason, or was there an explanation as to why materials and supplies jumped up to like $1 million from 350,000 last year?
Off the top of your head, I can look back.
That's just in there to offset all the local revenue, which comprise a large portion. So the local revenue is like site collected monies, donations. And we do budget that expense so that the sites see that money is available to spend. Because obviously we're trying to get them to spend the restricted versus unrestricted. So that's why it's in there. It's, it carries forward into the next year if it's unspent. But we do want the sites to be able to see that it's there.
Josh, what's your best guess on why there was an astounding 17.4% reserve in 2016-17?
I mean, remember, it's based on expenditures. So the expenditures were much lower then too, right? So the 3% reserve of that was only 750,000. The total assigned was 4.4, 17.4%. It was between 16-17 and 24-25, we've had major cost escalation.
Yeah.
Dramatic.
Well, just in proportionally, I mean, back in the day, not that far away, but when I was on the board, I mean, we never, ever saw a percentage even getting to 12. So what I'm asking you is what is, okay, increase in costs, I get that increase in people, but still you're looking at a proportional, you got an increase in income too. So I'm just wondering how Song maneuvered that, because I think she did. I mean, I think not in a bad way. I just think that she probably worked the budget so that she was putting more in the reserve than previous superintendent of businesses.
So the whole discussion on reserves could evolve a bit related to unrestricted versus restricted. What I've seen is in Song's era, there were very high restricted reserve balances carried forward that could be used to offset restricted expenditures, which was helpful, right? Because she was augmenting potentially the general fund.
Yeah.
And we're in a state where that's not the case anymore. And it really started to come on. I mean, we did get an influx of the ESSER dollars I mentioned, but there was pretty large restricted carry forwards in the components of the ending fund balance every year that now we're down to, I mean, I think we projected like 1.3 million in restricted revenue or restricted carry, assigned restricted in the reserves carry forward to 25-26, where last year it was 2.8 million, the year before it was 4 million. So once we're losing that restricted dollars, we're also we're losing the ability to carry it forward in our reserves. So
do you guess then that the restricted dollars, the loss in that revenue over time is political in some way? I mean, because restricted monies are coming in because from state and federal, right? I mean, that's where you're getting your restricted funds in from. So who's controlling that? That's the politicians that are controlling the amounts that come in and boom years, not boom years, bust years. So I'm just wondering, like, it's just an amazing contrast to me, based on my previous experience.
I just had a little aside with Carly, because a lot of restricted dollars are tied to our unduplicated pupil count, also our UPC or UPP, we use it. And the district's percentage hasn't gone down, right? It's actually our targeted youth population has went up. Small percentages, half fractional percentages. So you should be seeing revenue increasing from those restricted resources year over year, and that's not what we're seeing. And the potential for that, I mean, if I tried to delve into it, my first best guess would be that the apportionment per pupil has went down, but the pupil numbers have went up, right? So what was once funded at $100 a student is now funded at $50.
I was gonna ask it too. I mean, there have been cases in the past where boards have put more money, like I'm thinking of the 200, right? The 200K. That's a way to put money aside that helps buffer the reserve. I mean, that might be part of it. I mean, I'm asking. The restricted reserve, not the unrestricted.
You would have to, so right now the two, that you're mentioning the $400,000 unrestricted contribution to two funds, Fund 40 and 14. You would just, the board would have to direct staff to take $400,000 and assign it in the component of ending fund balance for a purpose. But we're talking about interfund transferring. They
So
are
that doesn't
two
turn
different
it,
things.
that does not turn it into restricted funds when we put it
No.
in the fund. Okay, sorry.
As I mentioned, I mean, so let's use an example. We had restricted money, which was the music arts discretionary block grant. The board directed staff to take, I think it was $175,000 and commit it in the reserves to future STRS and PERS increases. So that was an assignment taken from a restricted resource, restricted revenue. We assigned it in the ending fund balance. And that makes up part of our reserves. Yeah, and that is actually unrestricted, right? But it's set with the board goal of if we have next year, I mean, honestly, if it's we may take up what we have now if next year's increase is over 0.5% for PERS. Right. So it's trying to help us buffer, and back to the discussion I had earlier, that's what we use the reserves for. Usually it's not to pull from when we're deficit spending, it's to pull from when we have unanticipated increases in expenditures, like an increase to PERS and STRS. So when the board decided to take that one-time money and move it into the component of ending fund balance and assign it, that is absolutely, what the board, that was a great decision by the board at that time. Is it going to help us if STRS and PERS go up by 1%? But it will help with 0.5%. So that's good foresight, and that's something we probably need to look into. But I mean, in the future, if there was more one-time dollars associated that were discretionary that you could pull from and do that with.
Sorry. Apologies for focusing on kind of the smaller numbers, and I'm not able to see if this is like a pattern over 8 years, but just the pattern over the past 4 years. The equipment over 5,000 went from 8,300 to almost 279, and it was kind of like on a trajectory up. Again, apologies if I missed the explanation, but is there any background on that?
No, so no apologies needed. We only addressed kind of certain variances. We kind of tried to look at what were the large variances. I don't have it in front of me. Are you looking at unrestricted or restricted?
Restricted on Exhibit B.
Okay, Exhibit B.
Yeah, restricted.
So that could be tied to some of the restricted grants we have. So for example, let me take Prop 28. We have an 80% requirement to spend 80% of that revenue that we receive, which is restricted, on salaries. The other 20% has to be used on, we call it the 4s through the 6s. That's materials and supplies, professional growth, services, and other. So the district probably budgeted where it needed to align the budget with the restricted resource requirements given to us.
Gotcha. Okay.
Looking back at what Beth had mentioned of the 17.4%. 2016 is like year 2 of LCFF. Right. And so back then the discretion, the dollars, the restricted dollars were more discretionary. Right. Because the whole goal of LCFF was to give districts more control. Yeah, so but I think that the funds more recently have, especially the COVID funds, were more targeted.
Absolutely.
So it would have been easier to put that into the general fund.
Correct. Good point. Yes. Yeah, the inception of LCFF was 15-16, was it? No, 13-14. First year being 15-16. And absolutely, the influx of categoricals, restricted revenues at the time gave the districts more discretion as to how to spend those dollars. Yes. So next, we're going to kind of take a total shift off of expense and revenue and take a look at our historical enrollment to staffing ratios in the district, if that's okay. Yeah. So PGUSD has been in a declining enrollment for the past decade. We went from just over 2,000 students to just over 17,000 students. This is a net loss of 274 students from 13-14 through 25-20 through 24-25. PGUSD has been adding labor force as well, which has been to address many programs such as learning loss mitigation, mental health concerns, and others. A lot of what we spoke about tonight. That's why we've been adding staff, but it's important to contextualize all of this. However, you can see in 13-14, the district's total FTE equivalent was 212.6 staff district-wide. And now in 24-25, the district's FTE, full-time equivalent, is 262.49 staff. The total increase to staff while in a declining enrollment equals just under 50 FTE. With a declining enrollment of 274 students, we've added 50 FTE. Now, again, that's not 50 people, because some folks have fractional FTEs that could be added to prior fractional FTEs, but I have all of this data from Song and Rick Miller, and that's where we stand right now.
Just a quick question about PGTA and CSEA, everything like in
This is district-wide.
district-wide. Thank you.
So even with the expansion of universal pre-K, and our UPK numbers have not made up the losses from declining enrollment, which we had anticipated. Our declining enrollment alongside PGUSD's historical smaller class sizes can play a role in addressing deficit spending in our district. With fewer students, PGUSD may have the opportunity to reduce overall staffing levels and operational costs to address shrinking revenues. In the context of declining enrollment, districts must strategically manage resources, using these shifts as part of the broader plan to stabilize finances without sacrificing the quality of education PGUSD has been known for. Next slide. Let's see, 23. Some of the areas PGUSD can focus on to address deficit spending and align our resources to declining enrollment is that of class size optimization. Our district has class size goals and maximums as shown on the slide. There is a recommendation to begin looking to align class size goals with enrollment in lieu of maintaining much lower than class size goals. To be clear, we're not recommending pushing classes to goal or max, but we need to begin taking a look at the state of our declining enrollment and better align our class sizes depending on grade level with the appropriate staffing. Dr. Adamson.
That was really well said, Assistant Superintendent John. I think the only piece I want to add here is I think this really is, it's a reminder for us, it's an opportunity for us to be sure that we're very closely, looking at that enrollment from year to year. I think we've, definitely past practice has been, if we go one number over projected numbers in the summer, we've been very quick at that point to add another class. So I think this really is a chance for us to sort of reset our practices and really look at numbers and ensure that we're adding and staffing according to the need, and maybe holding and waiting to be sure that those students are going to actually show up in the fall when we open class, because that doesn't always necessarily happen, and we know that, and this gives us that ability to go back and look at those trends. So again, it's an opportunity for us to, and really sort of a little bit of foresight that, those will be some practices that we'll be implementing in moving forward.
PGUSD has benefits. PGUSD students have benefited from small class sizes at our elementary school sites. Just to give you, I think it's important to note kind of our averages here. So 24-25 TK class sizes, they are set to 24-2. That's statutory. One instructor, and I say 1 to 2 instructional aides because there are some TK classes that have more than one instructional aide. They also have volunteers. Kinder classes are averaging 20-1 with some instructional aid support. First grade, 25-1, second, 23-1, third, 23-1, fourth, 20-1, and fifth, 24-1. Again, these are averages across our 2 elementary schools. I think what's important to highlight is what's in parens next to them, with some instructional aid support. This district has quite a few instructional assistants, which certainly help with small group instruction. They help to address the learning loss mitigation that this district has felt, as well as many other school districts. But looking at our comparable districts, we don't see this many instructional assistants at other comparable districts in the classrooms at these grade levels. At the middle school, we benefited also from smaller class sizes. You can see here some of the averages. Sixth grade class size is 25-1, seventh grade 25-1, eighth grade 24-1. So this doesn't, I'm not including in this average the smaller elective class sizes. This is simply core. The high schools also benefited from smaller class sizes, but they also have more singletons that they offer at PG High School. That's more sections of classes for interested students that this district can offer, which has been a draw to our high school. And that's a testament to our teachers at the high school. Ninth grade class size is 29-1. 10th grade class size is 30-1, 11th 29-1, and 12th 26-1, again, averaging all. I'll take a pause there.
I'm sorry, my mind is like 2 slides back perpetually. But so the students have gone down, and if we're using historic, the class sizes have remained the same from 2013 to 2024, roughly. Is that safe to assume? Well, basically, where are these FTEs coming from, do you think? Are they, I know there's some mental health increases, but is it the cumulative instructional aids?
No, the instructional aids are that's on the classified side. I'd say diving in a bit, which I did at the high school. I didn't do so much at the middle school. A lot of the singletons we offer requires additional staff to teach those classes. I mean, if we try to instruct students and carry just core curriculum, that's not going to be a very interesting high school to attend. So I would suggest that the expansion of FTE, even in declining enrollment, was for the district and for the high school to provide singleton classes for our student population, classes that are of interest to our students. Even if they yield a 10 to 15 student class size, those are class sizes that we should be offering our students because there's interest.
I would say that over the course of that same time, there's been other services that have been expanded, just in my tenure at Forest Grove, I know that counseling services were, expanded throughout the district in 2 separate actions. One focused on, an elementary expansion of counseling hours, and the other focused more on the expansion of counseling at the secondary schools. I think it's important to note too, at the same time, there has been some support staff additions made within the district office. That's part of the count there as far as the 49 go to. But then at the same time, that as the enrollment declined, the amount of staffing at the elementary schools remained pretty stagnant until the last year. That's where we tried to do some reductions based on attrition. Basically, if a teacher retired and the groups coming up didn't fill the 3 classes, it was an opportunity to go from 3 at a grade level down to 2. Then there's also been an increase or an attempted increase in the numbers of folks that we had supervising at noon duty to try to increase the safety of the environment, there. I believe that the number of computer techs throughout the district also has increased as there has been a greater, infusion of technical devices with the funding that we got from Measure A. With that many more devices, it took more folks to support those devices. So just kind of trying to paint as broad a picture as we can. And in terms of the class sizes and things like that, we are starting to see, staffing that may be in excess of the numbers of students that we have here. Yeah.
Josh. So just piggybacking on what Buck said, from my perspective, okay, I left the board in 2009. Now I'm back. And what's the difference? Okay, what I see as the difference is, well, we have a resource officer we pay. We have a director that we pay for facilities and maintenance. We didn't used to have a director. We had a foreman. We have other directors, and I'm not criticizing this. This is just what I see, like, wow, how this ballooned. But I understand the reasons for it. Like you mentioned, IT. Look at the IT, and we have to have it. But that's a big department now. So, what didn't look different to me was really the classes, but the class sizes. And when you look at, I mean, historically, we have had declining enrollment since probably in the 80s. That's when it started. Because when the Silicon Valley people came down here and started buying houses without negotiating for a price, just plunking down the money, and we started losing families. That's when Fordor left, and that's when our enrollment started to decline, and it just little by little by little it's just been a continual march. So but anyway, but that's what I noticed, like, oh my God, we have a lot of administrative staffing that is necessary, but definitely it's a difference.
Going back to the same era, I've been here, this is year 27. No campus security, extra campus security, not at SRO, we had zero campus security. We had my current position, the curriculum coordinator, Barbara Novelli, was a half-time position. So there's just so many more needs now. And the irony with local control is it tries to give more control over to the district. So you have less like state bureaucracy, but it creates more bureaucracy locally. And with that is accountability. And with that is a need for jobs and people to fill those positions. And then basically the entire tech department, is new.
Got 2 slides. I'm sorry.
Can I add
Yeah,
just
I'm
one
sorry.
thing? I think the other thing that's not being brought up is we did experience a pandemic. And there was a lot of mental health crisis that occurred and continues to occur. And I think that's going to continue. So when it comes to any mental health therapists, anybody that's there for student support, I mean, those are areas that I think are absolutely essential, like IT. I mean, we can't exist without it anymore. And that's just the world that we live in, as well as security, campus security. So it really is just the entire climate has changed to a point where it's no longer what it used to be. And that's just the facts. So how we get out of deficit spending, I don't know how long that relationship has already been happening, but to try to get out of it now is going to be tricky because our requirements are so much greater now. So I guess it's more of a comment than a question.
Okay, let's talk about addressing annual deficit spending. So we want to address the balance between managed and unavoidable cost escalation in school districts, which is crucial for maintaining fiscal health and our educational opportunity. Managed costs such as discretionary spending on programs, administrative overhead, capital projects, they can all be controlled through strategic budgeting, efficiency improvements, and prioritization of essential services. I do highlight efficiency improvements because it's something this district's doing to try to drive down our operational expenditures, which are tied directly to our unrestricted general fund. We're only in year 1 of that, but there are anticipated savings associated with reducing our operational costs. On the other hand, unavoidable costs like employee salaries, benefits, pension obligations, inflation-driven expenses often increase annually and are harder to adjust. So to effectively manage both, we must adopt a proactive financial strategy and include long-term forecasting, cost containment measures, and leveraging available funding resources. By clearly distinguishing between what we can and cannot control, PGUSD can prioritize its spending. We can implement cost-saving initiatives and ensure the essential educational services remain intact while addressing escalating costs. So these are just some of the managed costs and unavoidable costs that this district is dealing with. But it's something that we absolutely have to consider. And to bring it down to a more simplified term, sometimes we have to look at the like to haves versus the must or need to haves, right? We really need to start looking at that. This is nice to have, and it's great, and it is something that we pride ourselves on as Pacific Grove Unified School District. But is it a must? And those are the tough decisions this board and this district are faced with right now. We are a wonderful district. We have so many great things to offer our students. The but, unfortunately, is we're losing revenue dramatically. We're dipping into the reserves every year, and that is something that's not sustainable. So we are going to have to take a hard look at all of our programs and our staffing and make some hard decisions. Let's look at the next steps. So the next steps in the process, we've already started the budget development process. We're going to have our site budget development meetings that are February through April. We will review enrollment to staffing at each school site and at the district office. We will review expiring, restricted, and categorical revenue and prepare solutions, which include reduction of expenditures or sizing of programs equitable to the revenue being received. We're going to review and address the unrestricted general fund encroachment from prior years of restricted resources and with our 2 subsequent out years with restricted resources. And finally, we need to bring a draft budget forward by May 15th to the board so we can have public comment and we can bring a budget to the board in June for approval. As we move forward into developing the budget for 25-26 year, it's crucial that we address several key challenges while ensuring the continued success of students and the sustainability of our programs. First, we must strategically plan for the loss of one-time revenue, finding ways to absorb this shortfall without substantively impacting the quality and breadth of our educational offerings, and with minimal impact to the unrestricted general fund. At the same time, addressing our deficit spending requires us to prioritize efficiencies, identify areas for cost savings, and adjusting where necessary to create a balanced and sustainable budget. Equally important is aligning our resources with the realities of declining enrollment. As student numbers decrease, we must adjust staffing and resources in a way that preserves the integrity of our programs, while ensuring we are making the most effective use of funds available. This means making tough choices, but also seizing on opportunities to create more streamlined, responsive district. Lastly, our budget must remain fully aligned with the Local Control Accountability Plan, the LCAP, ensuring that all funding decisions prioritize equity and support of our district's long-term goals. It is essential that as we navigate these challenges, we do not compromise on our commitment to providing all students with the resources and opportunities they need to succeed, while doing so in a fiscally responsible manner. In summary, developing the 25-26 budget will require careful planning, continued transparency, and a commitment to prioritizing student success alongside district fiscal solvency. By balancing fiscal responsibility with our mission to serve every student equitably, we can build a resilient, sustainable future for our students and our staff at PGUSD. That is the end of my presentation.
So I think at this point, okay, let's do a very quick, maybe 5-minute, gets us back at 9:20, but we're going to go into public comment next. Just a quick comment on that, if I can, before we break, is a reminder, we're only doing 3 minutes per person, and I apologize for that. But I do want to encourage everyone to reach out with any thoughts, comments, after the fact as well. And then we'll come back for board after that. So see you guys back here at 9:20. With that, we have Ms. Richmond at the mic. So please go ahead.
Sally Richmond, Pacific Grove High School. I'm also a resident of Pacific Grove, and I have a few questions, which I realize that you cannot respond to. I also have some comments. So my first question is that we referred to restricted costs that now need to get moved to the general fund. And specifically that had to do with like mental health therapists, et cetera. I wanted to know what costs there were, if any, that were beyond COVID inspired costs that were being moved over. Okay. The second question that I have is when will we have information on Proposition 19? I wanted to talk about our reserves, and I'll do that now. So could we bring up slide 21, please? Okay, the question came about where did the 17% come from? And I don't really have a better answer, but what I wanted to say is if the years extended further up than 2016, so if they went back to like 2013, et cetera, we would see around 10, 11, 12%. And what happened was there was the housing crisis, and then we found ourselves with STRS just increasing through the roof. And so from the teacher's perspective, we were all summoned to the auditorium and told in no uncertain terms that we were all getting pink slips and this was the end of the world and that the sky was truly falling. Well, the sky did not fall. I don't know that many people got pink slips, but the board went into like a deep, deep dive and really cut down on their spending in general. At that time, we were trying to, of course, negotiate for raises, and we were told, oh no, we need to get the reserves back to 10%. We need to get the reserves back to 10%. We did get the reserves back to 10%, and then the goal was 12%, and then it became 15%. And when we were sitting there at 17%, we were told the goal was 20% reserves. So this leads to my request that the board set a reasonable goal for the reserves and that we stick to it and it does not become a moving goalpost. Okay, thank you very much. My next comment would be that given our current situation, perhaps we consider not moving $200,000 into the reserved maintenance or deferred maintenance has been done before, especially with the Measure D money that's coming our way. I'll save the worst for last. I have two more comments. The first is that the high school has actually shown an increased student population over the last 5 years. I have not gotten back 10 years. Over that 5-year period, we have had a reduction in the number of FTEs. So when we start talking about staffing, it always sounds to me like teachers, but I don't think that that is necessarily true. And since I'm down to my last 15 seconds, I would like to suggest that the board do a full study regarding whether or not there would be any cost savings to restructuring the elementary schools. We can't make a decision on that unless we have the data. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Nicole Bielich. I'm an English teacher at the high school and a middle school parent. Forgive me because I have some questions that I'd like to pose. I know you will not answer them, and they don't really go together. The first question, Josh mentioned that over the last 10 years, there has been a total increase to staff in the number of approximately 50 FTE. My question is it possible to disaggregate some of that data and determine how many of those FTE are certificated staff versus classified and administrative staff? I think it would be really important to look at that data. In addition, Josh shared the class size goals, which we're going to be trying to maximize for the next school year. I saw goals for TK all the way through 5th grade, but not goals with regards to middle school and high school. As a secondary teacher and parent, it would be nice to have those delineated as well. And then lastly, on slide 14, there were some examples of one-time funded resources, and I want to point to two positions in particular. The first is the 2 resource teachers. It's partial funding RSP. It's a 1.0 FTE. In addition to that full-time employment, there is the 1 FTE, 1 intervention teacher, and those were positions that have been in this district. This is my 11th year. Those were positions that we had before COVID, so I'm just wondering kind of why those became a one-time funded resource. And that is it. Thank you.
Any other comments in the room or online? Thank you so much.
Okay, Lauren Davis. I am the resource teacher at Robert Down. And just a few comments. One of those is special education teachers are very impacted in our district. Josh mentioned we have great programs here. Families move into the district because of those programs. But some of the special education teachers in this district are beyond past their breaking point. The load is very overwhelming. And another point would be, well, I know we're looking at where can we cut costs. There are some areas where maintenance, we need more maintenance people in our district. And so how can we look at being really strategic in where we cut our costs? Thank you.
Any other comments in the room or anyone online? Okay, if not, I will close public comment and come back to the board. And I will go free for all style. If anyone has any questions or comments, please jump right on in. Laura, please.
So I do have a question about Prop 19. Do we have an idea of when we'll have info about that?
So we have not seen any trickle-in effects thus far this year in increase to property tax revenue associated with Prop 19. The district, I just presented this at the last meeting as it relates to property tax revenue and actuals to date. Our actuals in just through December brought us to just over 1.3 cumulative for the year. We're anticipating somewhere around 2. I don't want to misstate. Yeah, it's like a little over 2. So it's tough to tell whether or not the April tax receipts might come in substantially higher than the December tax receipts. If they do, that would certainly be an indication of properties selling in our area with a higher assessed valuation, which means we garner more tax revenue off of that. Long term, simply put, this will impact our district in a positive way. I use this as an example all the time. We talked about it at Rotary a couple of weeks ago. Patrick Finn did a wonderful presentation. Over 2,000 homes in the boundary area of Pacific Grove School District have assessed valuation of $200,000. Why is that? Well, it's Prop 13, right? That's great for people that live in them, right? And want to pass them on to their families. Prop 19 did change that. So for those of us that own homes in this boundary area, it's going to be tougher to pass those homes along to our children. That's a result of a state law that passed. But that's staggering to hear that 2,000 homes in our boundary area. I mean, and some of those, I want to say it was like 800 or Pebble Beach. Okay. Because those homes were purchased in the 1950s or the 1960s and they're capped on Prop 13. So Prop 19 will impact this district in a very positive way at some point. It's tough to know when. We're hoping we start to see a trickle in on that this year because it passed. I'm sorry, I think it passed, it went into effect January of 24. So we should see some residual effects.
And not to be morbid, but we do live in a community that is elderly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sorry, but it's the truth. And so that I think is gonna, it makes an impact. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
To anyone that may have taken offense, I apologize.
A quick counterpoint point to that is that we will lose some families potentially as the housing prices go up. So we're gonna deal with more. I mean, it,
Potentially, but if it's handed down through trust, then it's just property taxes that they're having.
I mean, yeah, I'm thinking more like new families that would move here to the place. Yes.
Absolutely.
Very good.
So I think of another silver lining being that families families that might inherit that property now might be able to move here and live here because they would be able to move into that home and shelter. That wouldn't help the district, but it would help with more students. It would shelter that increase, the property tax increase, right? If they move into the home and live in the home for 2 years due to Prop 19, their property tax rates are left at the Prop 13 capped rate. So it could bring in more families.
Or they sell it and get the step down. Anyway, but sorry, I did a lot of research when you brought up Prop 19.
Yeah.
One other question, I brought this up earlier. I'll bring it up. Well, let me ask other people. Let me let other people have a chance. Okay, the 10% reserve. I said, this is something that we've been banding about since I've been on the board. Is this something that we could propose that our policy committee take up if it's of interest to the board to say this board feels a 10% reserve is what we should be targeting? Because that is, and maybe it's too soon. Maybe we want to get through this budget process to say that, but I just want to, again, bring that up there because I agree with the comment that was made that this is something that we target, but we say it. We haven't actually set it up in our regs or policy. I'll go to that. Yeah,
That would be the direction of the board. And, absolutely, that would be the process through our policy committee meeting, right? Developing that policy for it. Yeah.
I do like how Josh presented the 10% being, when, I don't know if you mentioned 10%, but that the reserve, the purpose of the reserve. Okay, so I think if you bring a policy forward, you would be including that in that policy, that this was the purposes of this reserve. Because I think that gets lost and it becomes, I mean, I've heard past, and I won't name anybody, but past superintendents of business say things like, well, we have to have money in case of an extreme emergency or, so, but that's not what Josh was referring to. So I like that definition because I think it's speaks to a more reasonable situation and it gives a good explanation to the general public and our staff.
Are you seeing the definition of like the runway for how many? I mean, I know there's other factors into it, but how many months we could pay people, or what definition of the?
It wasn't just that. It was more about how the reserve is there to buffer certain expenses. Not that one I think was a little extreme on the trans loan. That wouldn't be a good explanation.
Right.
But a buffer, I think, on some of the other issues that come up. And why do you dip into your reserve? So I think identifying that is helpful.
Can I just quickly, for clarity, I kind of use the salary monthly obligations to kind of contextualize like dollar for dollar.
Yeah.
But really, what Trustee Shamas is talking about is volatility to local property tax revenues, right? That's one big one. I mean, we had a housing market crash in 2008, right? There were deferrals on property taxes, and if the district did not receive the proposed anticipated property taxes, we would have had a serious problem meeting our short-term liabilities because the tax revenue anticipation note the district took on wouldn't cover that reduction of potential revenue. So that's a realistic example. And then there was many others, state funding, deferrals, there's a lot that goes into that. But for us, I think the biggest one is housing market, right? What happens if we hit a recession? What happens if the housing market flattens? What happens if people stop selling their homes? Or can't afford their property taxes. I mean, that's realistic and it has happened.
I would be in favor of this being brought to the policy committee for purposes of discussing a concrete figure with regard to the reserve and in the way that it has been discussed and we've been educated about tonight in terms of unanticipated expenses, not a pot of money that we pull from when we, I don't know. I don't even want to think about what's gone down. I also am curious about the 50 FTE people. I had that in my notes too. I was curious about a district-wide breakdown, what that looks like. And then also as a former elementary parent and parent whose children have benefited from intervention and resource teachers, I am curious about what is going on with that program and why it's potentially up for being cut right now. Yeah, I think I would like more information about that. A lot of gaps to fill. It's been, yeah. I think if we can all get on the same page and create a system that we know is going to be, that's something we can rely on, that the public can rely on, and what the same number we're all going to be working from, then at least we'll all know what the bottom line is. And even when it's hard, we can all be on the same page and it'll be transparent for everybody. So maybe we start there for tonight. I don't know if we're going to get to the bottom of like answering all of our budget questions. I'm not sure what additional direction, I guess, staff is looking for in terms of where we're headed.
Well, I think a lot of the questions that we're, making note of is this will be information we're going to obviously bring back, and it could be that it's in the form of a, the trustee update, or is it, additional information that we share out at a future, presentation. So we'll look at that and kind of determine, what the best, avenue of doing that is. Just as far as, specific sort of a plan and a proposal on, where, we're anticipating some of these restrictions, happening and moving forward, that will be something that, we as an administration will bring forward to you. Staff will bring that for your approval, and that really likely will happen, between now and the May, budget proposal. So yeah, that will all be forthcoming.
Two quick thoughts on that, because I think that's a really important point is we are going to be posting this presentation online now that it's been done, right? Would it be possible for some of the board questions like that are easily answerable, like the 49 number, be put into like that kind of a document? I mean, just that way it's available online. So it's not just to trustees.
We could look at something
Okay.
along those lines.
Okay.
Yeah, I think,
possible.
Josh, you and I can connect on
Yeah, I
that.
mean, one fortunate thing that I inherited is all the way back to 2008-9, the budget book. I mean, it's really well built. I'll tell you, when I first started and started looking through this thing, it was very tough for me to absorb, but the historical data that has been kept in this district, everything, I have like 87 tabs worth of data that go all the way back. We have it readily accessible. It's all on the website, but yeah, we could do a summative paper and share that.
Because my other comment I was just going to make quickly on that, and this is not a direction. This is a feeling and emotion. I mean, I'll just say similar to the discussion that was brought up about, reconfiguring the elementaries for cost savings. I feel the same way about class sizes, increasing class sizes. I realize the haves and the wants, but I want us to make sure we're exploring all avenues, and I know we will, but I just want to say, like, feeling wise, that's something that does seem like something we want to do in worst case scenario when we've, dealt with some of the other things that we might be able to. So just a feeling, not a direction, but.
Josh, in terms of declining enrollment, what's the part, you mentioned the universal preschool. So you had an expectation that those numbers were going to come in higher. And how much higher? And also beyond that, what other kind of declining enrollment is like costing us money?
So for universal pre-K, it's a new grade level in the district. Even though we're LCFF funded, we do receive an apportionment for UPK implementation. So that's from the state. And we anticipated the growth of the TK grade level to be, oh gosh, I would say probably 25% higher than we're realizing. Buck wants to jump in, so.
The only reason I want to jump in is because I helped build the projections when we started off, when we started looking at the TK program. And where we thought that we would wind up settling is going to be pretty close, because we thought that where we eventually would get to when the entire year of the 4-year-olds were eligible to attend the transitional kindergarten, which is going to come next year, would be 4 transitional kindergarten classes district-wide. Just the way that the increases were trending as each 3-month period started to attend school, we thought that we would probably wind up with 4 times 24, 96 students. With the governor threatening to fund the ratio to 1 to 20 this year, then that would mean that if we hit 80 students, that would, well, anything over 60 students would give us the 4 classes that we anticipated. So even though the projection was to be at 96, the projection to have 4 transitional kindergarten classes at this time seems like it's holding.
Last minute comments.
I'd also like to, this isn't exactly for the budget, but I would like to have some class size goals for the upper grades too, or.
They're in the contract. It's not reflected on the
Okay.
slide. Should have.
No, the maximums are, but not the.
Oh, there are not, no, so there actually are not secondary goals. That's correct. It doesn't exist in the contract. The goals are set for elementary only.
Oh. I had another question about, Dr. Adamson made mention that the projections aren't exactly actual in terms of students. Like we think 100 students are coming to FG and then 90 students come. She didn't use those numbers. I'm just saying, do we know historically like what percentage that is off by or?
So I run, when I do the enrollment projections, I do cohort, it's called the cohort survival model. I know that sounds weird, right? But so there are percentage increases and drop-offs associated with each grade level. I'm just going to give an example, but this isn't the rule. If you look at our 5-year average, I do a 1-year average, a grade roll, a 2, a 3, a 5, and a 10-year average. That's how we build enrollment projections. Looking at the 3 and 5-year averages, we see that we get drop off from 5th to 6th grade, and we get drop off from 8th to 9th grade. We also have real weird anomalies, which is so instead of like 100% of the 3rd graders would move to 4th grade, that's a 100%. Sometimes we have 115% movement, right? So that is our transient families, military families that come in and out of the district. They're here for a couple of years, and it's really hard to kind of target those percentage increases and decreases. The one that I feel has been more consistent is leaving elementary school, going to middle school, and leaving middle school and going to high school. We do see some drop off, and that is a decision being made by the families, right? Maybe there's many reasons I could go into, right? Both parents are teachers at Stevenson, so they're going to send their student to Stevenson. They've been at PG Middle or Forest Grove, PG Middle, and now they're going to go. So there's that. We do get that. I mean, depends. There's movement, right? Families move out of the area. It's hard to kind of track that, but in my cohort survival model, I have all of those percentages weighted on actual movement of grade level students. So, if you're interested, I could sit down and show it to you.
No, that all makes sense. But I guess in the past or presently, basically we budget if there's one extra kid that we're presuming, then we staff for that position. Is that right? And I was wondering if there's maybe like more of a buffer or.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I think, we're going to be looking at. I mean, in particular, when we're talking TK, because we know that there's a specific ratio we absolutely can't go over. We're, literally fined by the state if we do. That's always sort of a little bit more of an unpredictable approach. We may have, a certain number of registrations, but not necessarily all of those students will show up on the first day of school. So sometimes waiting until we can be, for sure that we've got all of those students, in their seats. We can make decisions that way. But at the same time, also just looking at, we have that ability to look at past trends. So we kind of get a sense of which grades we know, we can be certain if we've got, 30 students in one particular grade that they're going to be 30 students next year, whether they'll be, increase or decrease either way. Looking at the trends, analyzing what the information we have according to it and making the decisions based on that is really what, we're anticipating doing going forward.
Just to add a little bit of information too, I think that historically, the most difficult grade to predict has been a kindergarten. And now that TK is, entered the system, now that is the most difficult to predict. So one of the things that we do is our staff calls all the local preschools and tries to see who has an intent of sending their children either to TK or kindergarten. I would say that the projections of the grades following that typically are very accurate. Yeah, that they don't vary by much. The only anomaly that I can remember, and it's just because I, still experienced the pain from it, was we had an influx of seventh graders when I was the principal at PG Middle, to the point where we did have to expand all of seventh grade by one section in math, English, social studies, and science, because that's like an entire class of kids coming in. We never experienced anything like that before or after, but it was just an anomaly. It's a little inexplicable, although I think it was tied to the housing crisis, and it might have been a return of private school students.
So, there has been discussion about possibly having, combo classes for the kinder and TK, level. And so that is something that we haven't considered in the past. So that would be another, sort of a creative approach to, our considering it, as opposed to then, opening up a whole nother class, which will require a whole, full-time, teacher for that position as well. So I think, it was said earlier on, I think the board, what we're hearing from the board, and I think, this is what we feel, strongly as a staff too, is we really want to be able to look at, all possible creative options available to us that can really, obviously ensure the integrity of the programs that we offer, ensure that, our teachers are able to, really be able to give their best, instruction possible with, reasonable numbers in the classroom that's not sort of taxing them. It's considering all of that involved, but at the same time, we are tasked with having to make reductions some way, right? And what we do know, what I can absolutely guarantee you, is that those are not going to be easy decisions. No matter what, we're having to let go of something. But please know, whatever that ends up being, it's going to be, done with the utmost amount of care and attention and thoughtfulness. Considering everything possible.
Sorry, one more question. With the instructional aids that you kind of highlighted that were above average in that number, is there a possibility of those aids floating between the classes? Like they do. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And those numbers don't include the student teachers though, right? Do they like CSOB, right? So that might be an opportunity for expansion of programs like that to counteract some of the costs. But again, creative, sorry. Thinking. Okay, I'm going to make a quick motion that we extend because we're coming close to 10 and we're going to have to go back to closed session. So I'm going to make a motion that we extend this meeting to 11 p.m. because Laura doesn't have to work tomorrow. She told me.
Oh, no.
She actually encouraged us to. Yeah, exactly. But no, in reality, just we have closed session to go back to, and then we'll have to come back. My goal is not to go to 11, but I just want to let folks at least put that out for the board. And anyone
I'll second that.
Okay. We have it on the table. All in favor of extending till 11 at the latest, please say aye.
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 It was one grumble, it was still an aye, passes 5-0. I think with that, we'll go ahead and close this. There are a lot of really good questions and just again, encourage. I really appreciate how the district is being proactive with this, but also just encourage, keep up with the transparency you guys are doing and engaging with everybody at all the sites. So thank you all for sticking through and see you again at our next board meeting or when I gavel out, if you're really brave to stick around. Reconvening, gaveling us out at 10:59 after closed session. Information was given and information was received and direction was given. Thank you guys so much.